Every grade, attendance, and disciplinary action creates a data footprint. It is a permanent trail that follows a student long after the school year ends. In North Carolina, public school law requires districts to permanently maintain official student records, even after graduation. This baseline covers everything from transcript data to notices of long-term suspension. To manage decades of required record keeping, the state uses a unique identifier system, or UID. This UID attaches to a student and stays active across all North Carolina public school districts. If a student moves out of state and returns years later, that same identifier syncs right back up to their historical file. Because this state infrastructure retains information permanently, a simple local administrative mistake in third grade does not just wash away. Left unchecked, bad data can surface years later, creating friction for college applications or employment verification. Families face two distinct paths for student records. The default path of passive trust requires zero effort, letting the school handle the paperwork. But this risks public directory exposure and permanent errors. The active path requires formal requests, opt-outs, and regular file audits. Families must decide if the peace of mind gained through exhaustive data management is worth the friction it creates, or if they are willing to accept the risks of blind, passive trust. The primary legal tool families have is FERPA, the Federal Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It guarantees parents the right to access and control their child's education records. Look at this breakdown of school data. FERPA protects information maintained by the district, official grades, attendance, and discipline logs. But a teacher's personal observational notes, kept for their own use, sit outside that protection. They aren't official records and are off-limits to parents. Relying strictly on FERPA to understand your child's school experience means you only get the formal administrative perspective. The law secures the official file, but it intentionally ignores the informal classroom dynamics and daily observations. As a parent, you are granted legal access to a verifiable, but ultimately partial reality. Within those protected records, the single largest exception to FERPA's strict privacy rules is known as directory information. This category includes a student's name, their grade level, and participation in recognized activities. Here is the flowchart for this data. If families take no action, the default setting allows schools to freely share directory information with outside organizations. The active alternative is submitting a formal FERPA opt-out request to the district, blocking the outward flow of data. But opting out carries a distinct social trade-off. A complete blockout means a student's name might be excluded from the annual yearbook, the graduation program, or the Friday night sports roster. Achieving maximum data privacy requires you to manage annual opt-out paperwork, while also accepting the very real social cost of public exclusion for your child. Imagine reviewing your child's file and finding an error, a miscoded absence, or a suspension that actually belonged to another student. FERPA gives parents the right to request a formal amendment to correct inaccurate or misleading records. The school is legally obligated to consider your request and follow a set process. However, they are not forced to automatically agree with your assessment. If the administration refuses to change the record, families have the right to escalate the issue to a formal hearing, or at minimum, place a permanent statement of disagreement inside the file. Look at this matrix of effort versus impact. Navigating board politics and written documentation is exhausting. Fighting a minor issue, like a misspelled name, sits in the low-impact zone. Disputing a false suspension or severe transcript mistake plots heavily in the high-impact zone. Because North Carolina permanently retains official records, enduring the grueling bureaucratic fight to correct a substantive error yields an incredibly high return on investment for the student's future. There is a sudden shift in legal dynamics the moment a student turns 18 or enrolls in a post-secondary institution. Under FERPA, they immediately gain the status of an eligible student. At that exact moment, all legal access and privacy rights transfer entirely away from the parent and directly to the student. This timeline shows how that creates a blind spot for parents. At age 18, you lose all automatic access to grades, attendance, or discipline records. The active solution is the eligible student signing a specific consent form, legally granting parents continued access. This hard legal cutoff forces families to proactively balance a young adult's new autonomy with the practical need for continued parental transparency, preferably before a crisis hits. Navigating student records has no single correct answer. The right strategy depends entirely on a family's current life stage and their immediate needs. This scorecard breaks down the next steps for 3 primary profiles: the proactive K-12 parent, the crisis responder, and the eligible student. For the proactive parent, the immediate action is to audit your district's FERPA notice and weigh the real-world trade-offs of opting out. You should also maintain hard, offline copies of critical paperwork, like IEPs and end-of-year report cards, just in case the digital system fails. For the crisis responder dealing with a major mistake, you must submit formal amendment requests immediately to fight permanent retention laws and prepare for a hearing if denied. For transitioning families with an 18-year-old, initiate the consent form conversation before college orientation begins. FERPA and North Carolina state law provide the necessary tools to control a student's data footprint. But to protect that permanent record, families must abandon default settings and actively choose to wield those tools.